And then take a few more minutes to make sure your mind is settled down in the present, the here and now, and in a positive, altruistic frame of mind, wanting to learn and practice the Dharma to the best of your ability, the benefit of all living beings, and with the highest aspiration to attain full enlightenment, becoming a Buddha yourself, to be able to help all living beings in the best possible way. So I was asked to give this talk about the meaning and purpose of doing retreat. So I put together some things that I've learned. So in my own case, when I first started learning Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism in Dharamsala, I was really inspired by stories of meditators like Milarepa. And I had this thought, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. I just want to go into the mountains and meditate full time and reach enlightenment. And and then when I did my first retreat, I discovered how difficult it is. So that kind of took the air out of my balloons. What did I say? Air out of your sails? Anyway, yeah, anyway, it just kind of, I felt deflated. And so I have quite a bit of experience of the difficulties of doing retreat, and I can share those. But yeah, everyone's different. Everyone has different experiences. So maybe you won't have so many difficulties, but it's good to be prepared. It's good to know that, yeah, things can happen and what to do about them. And so, by the way, I won't be joining the retreat in the meditation hall, but I will be doing retreat on my own down in the little house called Tara's Refuge, probably because it has a bright green roof. Is that the reason? Yeah. Covered, protected by Tara overhead. Yeah, so I'll talk for a while, share my thoughts, and then we'll see if there's any questions that you may have. So the reason for doing retreat is like the ultimate reason is because we are following Mahayana Buddhism, and the goal of this particular tradition is becoming enlightened, becoming a Buddha, which means a complete transformation of the mind, eliminating all that is negative, like anger, greed, ignorance, and so on, all the afflictive emotions, afflictive states of mind, completely clearing those away so that they never arise again. And then also cultivating all the positive qualities of the mind, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and so on, and wisdom, understanding the true nature of things. So there's a lot of things that need to be done to actually become a Buddha. And it takes time, but we just do what we can. And a retreat is an ideal situation in which we can really work on our mind, on this transformation of our mind, work on decreasing the afflictive, disturbing, harmful aspects of the mind and increasing the beneficial, positive, constructive aspects of the mind. So in a retreat, as compared to normal life, when you're working with your family, living in a city, and so on. So in a retreat situation, you have fewer distractions, fewer things to distract your mind. Because when we're busy working, talking to people, running here and there, watching TV, doing internet, and so on, then when we sit down to meditate, there's a lot more content to think about and find it difficult to stay focused on meditation. So in this kind of situation, you have fewer distractions, which can help your mind to calm down. And mostly keeping silence. That's recommended when doing retreat. And in that way, one can become more aware of what's happening in the mind, different kinds of thoughts and emotions. And that's really important because we need to be able to recognize the afflictions that we have in case, we don't, in case we think we don't have afflictions, then it's really good to look at the mind more carefully and honestly and then recognize things like anger, irritation, arrogance, jealousy, greed, and so on and so forth. So these become much more clear when meditating. And we need to do that, however unpleasant it is to see those things in oneself. But we need to do that because we have to know what we have to work on. If we don't recognize the afflictions in our mind, then we may think our mind is already pure. We don't have to do any work on it. So it's important to be able to see what's going on in our minds, to see the work that we need to do. And also in the retreat situation, like in this situation here, where you're doing retreat with a group of people, and also in a monastery. I mean, this is quite unique. When we live here all the time, this is the norm, this is just normal life here. But I think for people who come in from the outside, the way we live here, the way we do things here is probably quite extraordinary. And it's not that easy to go into a monastery and live in a monastery with monastics for a period of time. So this is quite a special situation, which I'm sure you're aware of. So in a retreat situation like this, you're surrounded by people who are really trying their hardest to practice and work on their minds and live ethically and so on. And that's really helpful to have that supportive community around you, as opposed to being on the outside where you have people doing just the opposite, going in the opposite direction to enlightenment. So it's really helpful to have this supportive environment, supportive community. And also here it's relatively quiet. There will be some noise, as you probably know, from the construction going on, but then you can rejoice in that and think how wonderful that there'll be a big, beautiful Buddha hall, hopefully this year, and a much better situation to meditate in than the dining room or even the meditation hall, which is a little small, a little cramped. Yeah. And also having the forests where you can go for walks and having nice views, that's really, really helpful. They say when you're meditating, it's good during the breaks to look out over vast spaces, look at the sky. It kind of opens your mind. Otherwise, your mind can get kind of constricted and tight. So this is really an ideal place for retreat. So one reason for doing retreat is to help ourselves, because we have suffering and the causes of suffering, afflictive emotions in our mind that need to be tamed, and also karma from the past that needs to be purified. So by working on these, purifying these, then that enables us to lessen our suffering, stop creating the causes for more suffering, purify the causes of suffering that we've already created in the past, and so on. So this is very beneficial for ourselves. And freeing ourselves from suffering uh, and attaining the state of peace, liberation, mainly involves what are called the three higher trainings: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So here we have a chance to work on those, living ethically, keeping precepts, refraining from negative actions, harmful actions, trying to create positive, virtuous actions as much as possible. So that's ethics. And then concentration, so spending time in meditation, working on the mind to learn how to keep the mind focused, so it's not just wild and out of control like a wild animal, a wild horse or wild elephant or monkey. um, and yeah, so we'll have the chance to work on concentration. And then wisdom. There's different kinds of wisdom. The wisdom of emptiness, ultimate truth, is the highest form of wisdom. But we also, I mean, that's quite a high thing to achieve. We can also cultivate the wisdom, understanding impermanence. That's one of the main goals in the practice of the four foundations of mindfulness, is understanding impermanence. It's more accessible, more doable than emptiness. And it's also extremely practical. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, so just gaining more understanding of the way things exist. Um, so that's wisdom. So we have the opportunity to work on all three of those here in this retreat. And then in the Mahayana tradition, we aspire not just to help ourselves, but to help others as well. Our whole goal is becoming a Buddha, fully enlightened, to be able to help all living beings. So that's very much emphasized in our practice, and always having that motivation that whatever we do, we're doing this to be of benefit to others. And so in the Bodhisattva's path, in addition to ethics, concentration, and wisdom, there's three other practices that are focused on giving, patience, and joyous effort. So those altogether make the six perfections, the six paramitas. And there's opportunities to practice those here as well. Giving, like offering service, so that's part of the schedule every day. Um, Washing dishes, cleaning, helping others, and so on. So that's a way to practice the practice of giving. Patience. Yeah, you might get irritated sometimes with other people and what they're doing. So that gives you the chance to look at the state of your mind and how much anger and irritation you still have, and be able to work on subduing those states of mind and cultivating more patience. And joyous effort is the opposite of laziness. So just having this joyful, enthusiastic energy to practice, to get up early in the morning and do all the practices, follow the schedule, and so on and so forth, learn. And so, again, all of those um, practices are things that you can work on here in the retreat. When doing a retreat, there's various ways of doing a retreat in terms of the length of time. You could even do like a 1-day retreat. People sometimes do that, like on a weekend or on a holiday, they'll just stay at home and focus on practice. Or it could be a 2-day retreat or a 1-week retreat, 1 month, several months, 1 year, several years, and so on. So the length of time, there's no fixed length of time. And in the Tibetan tradition, there's some people who go into life retreat. meaning that they decide to go into retreat and just stay there until they die. So that's pretty, you have to know what you're doing to do that. It's not recommended like your first time. But after doing retreat for a while, you kind of have you know what you're doing, and ideally also you've studied a lot. Yeah, that's very important, that you have knowledge uh, about the path that you're trying to follow and how to deal with different obstacles that occur on the path and so on, and know where you're going. So they say study is very important, but then once you've studied, you've learned, then focusing on practice so that you gain the realizations of what you've learned. And then also retreats can be on different topics, different subjects. So Lam Rim retreat, for example, you may decide to focus on the practice of Lam Rim, the stages of the path. There's also deity retreats in Tibetan Buddhism where you focus on a particular Buddha image. Last year it was Medicine Buddha, wasn't it? Yeah. So this year, I think it was by the wish of the majority of people in the community, the topic is the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which are also sometimes they're called the 4 foundations of mindfulness or 4 close placements of mindfulness. And this practice is quite important in the Theravada tradition, probably the main practice in the Theravada tradition. And some people may have the idea that it isn't part of the Mahayana tradition because you just don't hear much about it. You don't hear much about people doing this practice in the Mahayana tradition. But this is actually not correct. These 4 establishments of mindfulness are the first 4 points of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. This is a set of 37 practices that bodhisattvas have to do. That's part of a bodhisattva's path to reach enlightenment. It's not just bodhisattvas, but anybody who's following any Buddhist path, whether they want to attain nirvana, freeing themselves from samsara, or attain enlightenment to free all other beings from samsara, these 37 harmonies with enlightenment need to be practiced. And there's a very nice explanation in volume 4 of the series of books that Venerable Children is editing, Dalai Lama's teachings and materials from other traditions. So volume 4 is called Following the Buddha's Footsteps. And the last 3 chapters of that book explain the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, mainly these 4 establishments of mindfulness. There's very extensive explanation in there, both from the Tibetan tradition and the Pali Theravada tradition. So that's a really good resource for this practice. And in that book, His Holiness says that it's unfortunate that some practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism do not pay adequate attention to these 37 harmonies. So here's a quote from him. He says, "While the 37 harmonies are explained in Mahayana sutras and commentaries, they are not widely practiced among followers of the Tibetan tradition. This may be due to the fact that in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, these 37 practices are correlated with the levels of the 5 paths. So people may think that they are to be done later once you have achieved one of the 5 paths. However," he says, "I read a sutra that explained how to include them in our daily practice, even at the beginner's level. I would like to encourage Tibetan Buddhists to do these practices, especially the 4 establishments of mindfulness. They can be meditated upon with a bodhicitta motivation and the prasangika view of emptiness." So they're not at all contradictory to our practice for the attainment of enlightenment, and in fact they're essential for that. And His Holiness is expressing his wish that we do these practices. So, by doing this retreat, we are fulfilling His Holiness's wishes. So, even though they are essential practices in the Mahayana tradition for the attainment of enlightenment, you don't find many books about them, except for that one that I mentioned, um, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps. But there's a lot of books about these four establishments of mindfulness from the Theravada tradition. And there's some in the Kuan Yin room that you can read during the break times. And some of these books explain how to practice these four in quite nice and clear and relatively simple ways. For example, there's a book by Bhante Gunaratana. He's a teacher from Sri Lanka, but he's been living in America for, I don't know, how many years? Ages, 50 years maybe, over in Virginia. Is it Virginia or West Virginia? West Virginia, yeah. And yeah, he has a lot of experience teaching Westerners and has also written a number of books. So his book is called, what is it? My Four Foundations of Mindfulness in Plain English. And it is. It's very clear and simple and has nice examples and so on. So I recommend that one. And then Thich Nhat Hanh, there's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. Is it Transformation and Healing? I think he's also explaining Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And his style is also very, very simple and very inviting. You know, I find that it makes you just want to do these practices. And then there's another really excellent book by Joseph Goldstein called Mindfulness. And we have 2 copies of that in there. And this is based on a series of lectures that he gave, something like more than 40 lectures on the Satipatthana Sutra. So he really goes into quite a bit of detail. And it's also very practical, how to actually practice these things. And so if you're new to the practice, then those books are particularly good. And as His Holiness said, in order to make the practices part of our path, the Mahayana path to enlightenment, make sure that these practices will bring us to enlightenment, then we do them with the bodhicitta motivation, which anyway you're doing every day, every session, generating the bodhicitta motivation. And yeah. Another quote from that book, His Holiness says, in the structure of the stages of the path, the 37 harmonies with awakening are described under the path of the middle level practitioner. However, they can also be done with the bodhicitta motivation, in which case they become the path of the advanced practitioner and lead to full awakening. So here he's identifying where the 37 harmonies, including the 4 establishments of mindfulness, where they fit within the Lamrim. Those who are familiar with the Lamrim, the graduated or stages of the path to enlightenment, which is divided into 3 sections. We usually call this initial and intermediate and then advanced stages of the path. So these 4 establishments of mindfulness fit into the middle scope, intermediate scope, which is all about looking at samsara, our situation in samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, and characterized by suffering and unsatisfactoriness and lack of freedom and so on. So really getting a good understanding of samsara, what samsara is all about, and how we are stuck in this situation. It's like a prison, like being locked in a prison, not having real freedom. So recognizing this situation and then feeling the wish to be free, generating this strong determination to get ourselves out of this situation. And the way to do that is by working on our mind, mainly ethics, as I mentioned before, ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so this practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness can fit into all 3 of those aspects of ethics and concentration and wisdom. For example, mindfulness. We need mindfulness um, to remember what is involved in ethics. Like if you take precepts, you need to remember what precepts you have and keep that in mind. I took these precepts, I have to live by them. If I break them, I'm creating karma that will bring suffering for myself and others and so on. So we need mindfulness to remember the precepts we've taken and what's included in virtue and non-virtue so that we can live ethically. And we also need mindfulness to watch what we're doing and not act mindlessly, in which case we might commit unethical actions. So mindfulness is a very important aspect of ethics. And then concentration, and the development of concentration, mindfulness enables us to keep our mind on the object, remember the object and not forget the object. So it plays an essential role in the cultivation of concentration. And then wisdom. When we're cultivating wisdom, for example, impermanence, trying to understand impermanence, we need to be able to focus our mind on an object and contemplate it and understand how it's not as permanent as it appears to be. It's subject to change. It's changing moment by moment, even if we can't directly see that, but we can understand that. And so by that, we can develop wisdom, understanding impermanence, and the same with wisdom, understanding emptiness. So mindfulness is crucial in all three um, higher trainings, which are the practices to attain liberation. But again, as His Holiness said, if we're doing these practices with a bodhicitta motivation, our goal isn't just liberating ourselves from samsara, but becoming fully enlightened Buddha to help all living beings. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the retreat and the main topic of the retreat. And there's lots of materials that you can read about the practice of the four establishments of mindfulness. Also Lamrim, I think there's also some Lamrim material, so if you're not so familiar with the Lamrim, it's very helpful to familiarize yourself with that. So then, by way of advice, I recommend take it easy. It takes time to settle into a retreat, especially if you've just come from somewhere else and maybe you had a very busy life getting ready to come here and so on. So it can take several days or maybe even a week or longer just to settle down, get used to being here, and not fall asleep every time you sit down and try to meditate and so on. Catch up on your rest, catch up on your sleep. And also your mind, you're still probably thinking a lot about what you did before you came here and so on. So don't expect those thoughts will just stop as soon as you're here. They will continue for a while. And you'll find as time goes on, the longer you're here, then the more your mind will settle into being here and being into the retreat. Also, it's really important to avoid having high expectations, or in fact, any expectations of what you're going to experience. Lama Yeshe, many teachers say this, don't have any expectations when you meditate. Expectations are a killer. It's really hard to avoid, but it's detrimental, because if you have these expectations, you may not even be aware of them. You might just, you hear other people's experiences and you think you were going to have those experiences as well. And so if you have expectations of what's going to happen, what you're going to experience and so on, then there's a good chance they won't happen. You won't get what you expect, and then that can lead to disappointment and maybe self-flagellation, like, what's wrong with me? I'm worthless, I'm hopeless, I can't meditate. Other people are having realizations and experiences. They look so happy and peaceful and blissful, and I'm the only one who's having problems. So all this kind of stuff can go on in our mind that just causes your mind to be disturbed, and you might even you might even want to run away. So yeah, it's best not to have expectations if you can avoid it. And just be happy to be here and do the practice and just think, I'll just do my best. I'll do as much as I can and see what happens. So that's the best attitude to have. Because, yeah, I mean, there are things that happen as a result of meditation. There are insights, there are experiences, there are realizations that can occur, but we can't force them to happen. They don't happen by us pushing ourselves and trying to force ourselves to have those experiences. They happen when our mind is ready to have them. So maybe a good analogy is a baby. Yeah, like a baby will be able to walk one day, but you can't force the baby to walk before it's ready. Yeah? If you have the attitude, oh, I've been carrying you around now for 9 months, you're so heavy. Will you just start walking by yourself and trying to force a 9-month-old baby to walk? I mean, that would be cruel. So we wouldn't do that. So it's kind of similar if we try to force our mind to have realizations or certain experiences or be free of these unwanted thoughts and emotions before it's ready to. So it's unkind. It's cruel to try to do that to ourselves. So try to avoid that. And just yesterday I came across something I want to share with you. This is from a book by Bhikkhu Analayo, who's a German scholar, monk. He's done a lot of research on the Satipatthana, establishments of mindfulness, and written a number of books on it. He's done a lot of practice as well. So I came across this in one of his books. He says, although mindfulness requires cultivation, being a quality that needs to be established, such cultivation is not a forceful matter. Here it can be useful to take into consideration that the word sati is the Pali word for mindfulness, in the Pali language is feminine. I didn't know that Pali had masculine and feminine. But anyway, the word for mindfulness in Pali is feminine. My suggestion would be to relate to sati, to mindfulness, as a feminine quality. In this way, sati can be understood as receptively assimilating with the potential of giving birth to new perspectives. We should write that out and put it up. Right away from the moment of waking up in the morning, our good friend Sati can already be there, as if waiting for us. She is ready to accompany us throughout the rest of the day, encouraging us to stay receptive and open, soft and understanding. She never gets upset when we happen to forget about her. As soon as we remember her, she is right there to be with us again. Visualizing the practice in terms of a coming back to the presence of a good friend helps to avoid mistaking sati for a forceful type of hyper-attentiveness that requires strained effort in order to be maintained. Instead, being in her presence carries the flavors of an open receptivity and a soft alertness to whatever is taking place. So I thought that was really beautiful. But yeah, sometimes people in their practice are really kind of squeezing themselves, trying to have perfect concentration, perfect mindfulness, never losing mindfulness even for a moment. So that kind of practice, I don't know, maybe it works for some people, but for others it can be a recipe for lung. So lung, if you haven't heard of that before, it's a Tibetan word and it means wind or air, because they say within our body there are these winds, energy winds that move around. And if they get out of balance, then we can get sick. And I've had lots of lung, and maybe some of you have as well. It's not pleasant to have, and it can be a real interference in your practice. So it manifests in different ways, but if it does occur, then it becomes quite difficult to meditate, to do meditation properly. And so I can see in my own case that when lung happens, it's because I'm pushing too hard, trying to get something, trying to achieve something, trying to make progress. And that's when it comes on. So it's definitely not a good idea to do that. And I really liked what he said about a softness and gentleness. That doesn't mean being lazy, okay? So it's not just, lying around and being lazy. And there needs to be energy and attentiveness and striving, but just not that heavy-handed, forceful kind of way. So kind of middle way. Middle way is good. Not too hard, not too soft. But it's difficult to find that middle way. You may have heard this, the Buddha himself, I think it came from the Buddha, about the guitar, about the stringed instrument, that if you tighten the strings too much, they make a really unpleasant sound. But if you loosen them too much, they make another unpleasant sound. So you have to keep, turning the key to get just the right, what is the word? Tension to make the right sound, the beautiful sound. So in our practice, we'll probably swing back and forth, sometimes too hard, sometimes too soft. That hopefully eventually we'll find the right balance practice that where we can practice well, but not in a heavy, forceful way, but also not in a slack, lazy way. But that's something each person has to find on their own. So it's a good idea to think of retreat time as a time to become friends with yourself, friends with your mind. Some people talk about that, and I don't think you'll find that kind of statement in traditional retreat instructions. I've never come across it in the Tibetan tradition. It's more like about you have to go into retreat and attain realizations, but becoming friends with yourself is not usually mentioned. I hear that from Western teachers, but I think, yeah, for some of us, it is really important because many Western people, or maybe some Tibetans too, I don't know, but many people have this problem of being hard on themselves, being self-critical, self-judgmental, not accepting themselves as they are, and maybe even having self-hatred. So many of us are prone to those types of attitudes, and that's dangerous. If we have those kind of attitudes, then that is often what can lead us to push ourselves in practice. I've got to change myself. I'm such a horrible person. I've got to be like a bodhisattva. I've got to be like a Buddha as quickly as possible. So, yeah, sometimes our striving and our practice is coming from that kind of place, and that's not healthy. That's not the right attitude, the right motivation. So we need to look out for that. Look out for that kind of attitude of being hard on ourselves, not being kind to ourselves, and so on. And that, again, could be one cause for lung, getting lung. So, yeah, so learning to be friends with yourself, kind to yourself. I'm sure all of us have friendships with other people, and with our friends, we are kind. Maybe not always. Sometimes we get annoyed with them, but we try to be kind to them and accepting of them and patient and forgiving when they make mistakes and so on. So we probably know how to be kind to others, but when it comes to ourselves, we're often we do things to ourselves or say things to ourselves we would never say to anybody else. I mean, I find that myself. Sometimes the voice in my head talking to myself, I ask myself, would I speak like that to somebody else? No way. I would never talk to anybody else like that. I'd be too ashamed. And yet somehow my mind thinks it's okay to talk to myself that way. So it's good to, yeah, if you do notice that kind of thing happening in your mind, just recognize that is not healthy. That is not the way um, in Buddhism. Yeah, we need to learn kindness and compassion, forgiveness, gentleness, acceptance towards everybody, and that includes ourself. Although oneself is often the hardest one to be kind to. But we do need to learn that. So retreat could be seen as an opportunity to do that, to learn to be more kind to yourself. Yeah, and if you do read traditional instructions on the Lam Rim, for example, or the attainment of calm abiding, serenity, they will sometimes say things like, oh, you can attain this in 3 months. They do. They say calm abiding. If you hold all the right conditions together, you can attain calm abiding in 3 months. And then other instructions will say it's possible to attain enlightenment in 3 years. Well, there may be special, unique individuals who have the ability to do that. They probably did a lot of practice in past lives, so they came into this life with already a lot of practice under their belt and can very quickly attain those realizations. But if we take that kind of information and then put it on ourselves and expect ourselves to be able to make such achievements, then I think it's quite unrealistic and could be quite detrimental. I've even heard His Holiness this kind of statement about attaining enlightenment in one lifetime, which you do come across in some teachings. They say, yes, you can become enlightened in one lifetime. And he says that's like propaganda. Have you heard him say that? Yeah, propaganda. Yeah, he said, first time I heard him say that, he said, maybe 1 in 1,000,000. Yeah, one person in 1,000,000 out of practitioners might be able to do that, but most people no. I was greatly relieved when I heard that because, yeah, I'd been practicing for many years by that time, and it didn't look I was much closer to enlightenment. So, oh, but yeah, we have to be careful about those kind of statements. They might be helpful for some people. They might give them a lot of encouragement, and they'll push really hard and attain those goals. But for other people, it could just lead to long stress, more self-criticism, more self-hatred, and so on. So it's better, yeah, just to appreciate the practice and put our time and energy into doing the practice as much as we can, but put aside any thoughts, any ideas about achieving any particular goal during the retreat. Does that make sense? So then it's possible when doing retreat, this is certainly my experience, that you might have thoughts and emotions coming up that are disturbing. So don't be surprised. It may not happen to everybody, but it does happen to some people. And so don't think, oh, there's something wrong with me. Get angry at yourself, beat yourself up, and so on. And instead, it's better to see it as part of the process of purifying the mind, because we have to see what is going on in our mind, to be able to bring about a change, transformation of our mind. And so the ideal attitude to have with these disturbing and unwanted thoughts, emotions, and so on, is an attitude of acceptance, even though that may be hard. And there's this poem called The Guest House, which is quite well known in the Theravada tradition. They use it in their teachings, although it's from a Sufi master, Rumi, 13th century Persian Sufi master, mystic and poet. So it goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So some years ago, I was doing a kind of longish retreat on my own. And I was having a lot of disturbing thoughts in my mind. And I was reading a book by Tara Brach called Radical Acceptance. She's a psychologist as well as a meditation teacher. And that's the theme of her book, is accept whatever happens in your mind. Don't try to reject it or deny it, but accept it. So she quoted this poem, and it was kind of just what I needed at the time because I was really struggling with a lot of inner turmoil. So almost every time I would sit down and meditate, my mind would be invaded by all these disturbing thoughts and emotions. And my way of responding was, go away, leave me alone. I don't want you here. But that wasn't working. Like this saying, what's this saying? What you resist will persist. You heard that one? Yeah, I think that's quite true. And so this poem describes a different attitude, a welcoming, open, accepting attitude instead of this rejection, go away, leave me alone. And it was hard. It was hard. I worked on it though. I did try to change my attitude about these guests in my mind, these unwanted guests in my mind. But I did find it helpful when I was eventually able to do that. And it's not contrary to the Buddhist teachings because, for example, just some examples, in the practice of patience or fortitude, as Venerable calls it, there's three kinds of patience, and one is called the patience of voluntarily accepting suffering and problems. And that can be with regard to external problems, other people making trouble for you, or sickness or something. But I think it can also be in internal problems, things going on in our own mind that are troubling and disturbing. And so this practice of patience involves accepting them, not getting upset or angry or discouraged, but just accepting and working with them to the best of our ability. And doing that, having that attitude, working on your problems is virtuous. Learning to have patient acceptance of internal problems as well as external problems is a virtuous practice, is helping you grow that kind of patience. And also wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom that can be learned by working on your own problems. For example, when you understand your own problems, the stuff in your own mind, you're in a better position to be able to help other people who have similar problems. Yeah. And having compassion. Yeah, there's lots of other people who have this kind of problem too. I'm not the only one. So it can help you open up and have more compassion for others. And then in the Lojong teachings, the thought transformation teachings, there's a whole practice of transforming problems into the path. So the idea there is whatever problem you encounter doesn't have to be a bad thing, doesn't have to cause you to be upset. You can use that problem, use that situation to as part of your practice, part of your path. Again, for cultivating compassion for others, understanding karma, having greater renunciation of samsara. As long as I'm in samsara, then I will continue having problems like this. So there's different ways you can contemplate and use problems, whether they're, again, external ones or internal ones, things happening in your own mind. And there's a book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche about this practice, which is, what is it called? Transforming Problems into Happiness, I think. Yeah, we were talking about it the other day. Yeah, so that's a really excellent book that goes through different ways that we can utilize problems and transform problems. And in that book, he says, this is a very important practice for bodhisattvas. In fact, bodhisattvas actually like problems the same way we like ice cream. We always get excited when we have ice cream to eat. Oh boy, ice cream. But when it comes to problems, oh no, I don't want this. But he said, yeah, for bodhisattvas, when problems come along, they react the same way we react with ice cream. Oh boy, here's a problem I get to work on, and it'll help me get closer to enlightenment. Yeah. So I don't mean to scare you or worry you, but just to know that it's quite normal that difficulties could occur while you're in retreat, even though we're here because we want to do good, we want to help others, we want to transform our mind, get closer to enlightenment, to be able to help others in the best way. So you think, well, I'm doing good things, so things should go well for me. It shouldn't be difficult. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I think I've never met anybody who didn't have problems in retreat. Some people seem to have more physical problems. Yeah, a lot of people seem to get sick, or different things happening with their body. I've never had too much of that, but for me, it's more in here or in here, wherever the mind is. It's mental stuff. And I also just came across a quotation from Kirti Sencha Rinpoche, who's a wonderful Lama, and he spent quite a bit of time in retreat in the mountains above Dharamsala. So he says, in any Dharma practice, we will naturally face obstacles and difficulties. But who doesn't? Whether they're practicing Dharma or not, everybody has problems. Anyway, he says, it's important to face them. They are meaningful. These are not ordinary difficulties, so it's worth facing these problems. So saying they are not ordinary difficulties, it's probably because, when we are trying to improve ourselves, live ethically, practice Dharma, work on our mind, be a good person, and so on, we're practicing Dharma. So when problems occur while we are practicing Dharma, they say that this is actually a kind of purification, because we've created in our past, this life and many past lives, we've created a lot of negative karma, a lot of negativity. And that doesn't just disappear all at once as soon as we embark on the path, but it can ripen as we're practicing in forms that are less serious, less severe than otherwise. For example, we might have done some horrendous action that could cause a rebirth in an unfortunate situation where we'd face a lot of suffering. But while we're practicing Dharma, that karma can ripen as a headache or as whatever, some physical problem or some emotional problem, which is relatively mild compared to what could otherwise occur. This unfortunate rebirth, which could last a really long time and involve a lot of suffering. So people who understand that, practitioners who understand that, don't feel upset and discouraged when they face difficulties while practicing. Instead, they think, oh, this is great. My karma's diminishing. Like my karmic debts are getting paid off. So they see it as a positive thing, a good sign, rather than what's wrong, this shouldn't be happening, why does this have to happen to me, and all those kind of things. And then Kiri Sencha Rinpoche went on to talk about how bodhisattvas will go to hell to help sentient beings there, because they have such incredible, strong compassion to help sentient beings. They're willing even to be in hell. And he said, compared to that, the problems we face are nothing. And he said, it's good to think about that. That can give us spiritual courage. Yeah, so there's different ways we can look at whatever problems and difficulties occur during retreat, during our practice of Dharma, that can help us remain positive, confident, and have courage to keep going rather than getting discouraged and wanting to give up. So it's just a question of using those techniques when we encounter them. And if you do have difficulty, if you're relatively new to the practice and don't fully understand how to transform problems into the path, then please seek help. Talk to one of the older monastics and teachers and so on. And there's also this idea in the Buddha's teachings that problems are teachers. Problems are like spiritual teachers. They can teach us a lot, help us grow and progress along the path. And just to share something else, this is from the Tibetan tradition. There's a book called The Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace, which is about the cultivation of calm abiding, shamatha. And he includes some advice from a text by a Dzogchen master named Dujong Lingpa, about what to do when difficult things come up in the mind during retreat. So in this text by this Dzogchen master, apparently he talks about things that can happen when people are in long retreat. And some of these things are pretty horrific. I'll just read a few examples. The impression that all your thoughts are wreaking havoc in your body and mind like boulders rolling down a steep mountain, crushing everything in their path. That sounds pretty scary. A sharp pain in your heart as a result of all your thoughts, as if you had been pierced with the tip of a sword. Unbearable anger due to the paranoia of thinking that everyone else is gossiping about you or putting you down. Such unbearable misery that you think your heart will burst. Insomnia or fitful sleep. Grief and disorientation when you wake up. So those are just a few examples, but he had pages of these. But they weren't all negative. Some of them were actually quite nice, quite beautiful. Here's a few nice examples. The perception of all phenomena as brilliant colored particles. That would be cool. A sense of ecstasy as if a stormy sky had become free of clouds. So there can also be beautiful experiences, positive experiences. Don't think they're all going to be awful and scary. But just to know that there can be awful things that happen. And if they do happen to you, don't feel bad or ashamed or think you're falling apart. Alan Wallace says if some of these experiences happen to us, we'd probably go off to see a psychologist or psychiatrist, and get help. You think we're going crazy. But this text, so the author, the Dzogchen master Dujom Lingpa, after talking about these different experiences, He says, these are signs of progress. Interesting. I was real happy when I read that. It is a sign of progress when you recognize how cluttered and turbulent your mind is. And the deeper you go in the mind, the more you will encounter all kinds of unexpected and even troubling memories and impulses. I mean, when you think about it, they say our mind has been existing from beginningless time. It didn't just start with our body in this lifetime. It's been around a long time, and it's been through everything, and it's done everything. So if we were to open up and remember past experiences, whoo, some of them could be quite scary. And some of the kind of thoughts and emotions that we had in the past could be like this. So it's not surprising when you think in that way. There's a lot of stuff that we don't normally notice in our mind. But when you're meditating, especially, in long retreats, um, silent retreats and solitary retreats, then it's like you're opening up your mind to all that kind of stuff. So instead of thinking, oh, this is bad and I'm going crazy, I have to stop, he says, this is a sign of progress. And in fact, I have a friend a monk who, he's kind of part Gelugpa, part Nyingma. And so he spends a lot of time with Nyingma teachers and translates their teachings and so on. So when I told him about these experiences I was having in retreat, he got really excited and he said, "Oh wow, that's fantastic!" I was like, "No, it wasn't. It was awful." And he says, "Well, that's supposed to be what happens in retreat." So that's probably what he learned from his Dzogchen masters. He says, I never have experiences like that when I do retreat. So he was almost envious. Well, I'll try to remember that next time. Oh, this is good. This is happening. So anyway, Dudjom Lingpa's advice was keep practicing and observe whatever comes up without distraction or grasping. And so I've heard similar advice from other traditions as well, not just the Tibetan tradition, but in Zen and Theravada. And they say, whatever comes up in your mind, don't be upset, freak out, get distracted by it. Just notice it, accept it, and let it go and keep practicing. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. Like I said, not to scare you, but just to let you know in case something happens like that, don't worry about it. And it's all impermanent too. It's really helpful to remember that. Whatever happens in our mind is impermanent, transitory, like clouds in the sky. And sometimes, it can be pretty dark and thundery and lightning and stormy, but that passes too. And then before you know it, the sky is clear, the sun is shining, beautiful white fluffy clouds floating by. So you do come through these experiences and back to a state of clarity. And sometimes you have greater clarity, greater insight than you had before. You've learned something from those experiences. Now, it's good to have that kind of attitude. And we normally do a fire puja at the end of retreat. Is there going to be one after the first month? Yeah. So even those who are staying just for a month. So the purpose of the fire puja is to purify any mistakes that we may have made or any negativities we created during the retreat. So that's a nice way of ending things, kind of cleaning up. Well, yeah. And this isn't a traditional practice, but it's something you might like to do as you're going along in the retreat. If you do have negative thoughts or you remember negative things you've done in the past, you could write them down. Keep a list on a piece of paper. And then when doing the fire puja, we usually throw black sesame seeds into the fire to symbolize the negative actions we've done. But you could also, in addition to that, throw in that piece of paper. Feel like you're burning up all those negative thoughts and negative karma from the past. So that's just optional, but it does feel kind of good to do that. So that's all I've had to, I had prepared to talk about. There's a few minutes left if anyone has a question you'd like to ask.
Could you elaborate a little bit about the concept of karmic debt?
I didn't get the first few words.
The karmic debt?
Yeah.
The concept of karmic debt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you elaborate a little bit about
Oh, well, it's just I mean, it's not a literal thing, but in a past life, if I killed you, then there's a kind of karmic debt there. Yeah, that I created negative karma in relation to you, and then it's possible. I mean, I have created that negative karma, and if I don't purify it, there's the possibility that somebody, it could be you, it could be somebody else, will come along and kill me, do to me the same thing that I did to somebody else. So that's the meaning of karmic debt, kind of like a debt to pay, but not literally. Yeah, we're going to do a practice after this to make offerings to spirits who might be in the area and might um, cause problems during the retreat. And just ask them not to cause us problems and maybe go someplace else for a while. Don't hang around here. Yeah, so there are stories of people encountering spirits during retreat, like Milarepa. He came back to his cave one day and there were these demons in his cave. You told that story in the BBC. Yeah, these scary looking demons in his cave, and he was trying to get rid of them. What did he do in the end? Wasn't it meditating on emptiness? And that's, oh, stay as long as you want. Oh, huh? They had a discussion. Okay, so that's a bit like Rumi's poem. Yeah, he welcomed them. Yeah, and okay. So anyway, so they say that yeah, if we do face problems with other beings, other human beings, but also spirits, non-human beings, then there is this kind of karmic debt. We probably harmed them in some previous life, and they're sort of coming back to get us back, get back at us, get revenge. And so, yeah, they say the ideal attitude to have is not to be angry, because then we're just creating more negative karma, not to try to um, do anything harmful for them, towards them, because that's just continuing the karma. And instead, find a way to purify that karma. And yeah, having this attitude of acceptance, also loving kindness and compassion for them, praying for them, sending them good energy, and so on. So those are effective ways of dealing with spirits.
When you were mentioning about the negative or positive thoughts, but that Dudam Rinpoche was talking about, do they say that same kind of attitude about dreams? Disturbing or dreams?
I don't remember in that book if he said that, but it's possible that negative karma could ripen in dreams, have disturbing dreams. Is that something you've heard? Possible? But I've also heard that it's better not to take dreams too seriously. Sometimes people get really hung up about dreams and think they have more meaning than they do. And so they say, it's just something in the mind, and don't take it too seriously and get worried, upset, or excited. One other thing I forgot. This book just was published this year, and I thought it'd be useful for our library. It's called Beyond Distraction. And the author is Shaila Catherine, who I've heard of before. She's apparently done a lot of practice of concentration, and so she's going through the Buddha's recommendation on what to do with, if you have a lot of distractions in your mind. And I think it's really well done.